Hello, beautiful listeners, and welcome back to the Goddess School podcast. And today I am very excited. This is kind of an epic moment in the podcast. We have our first male guest ever. So I am so pleased to introduce you to Saul Luckman. He is an award-winning and international best-selling author of human fiction and nonfiction. And today we are going to talk about consciousness, the matrix, some words that I think many of you might be unfamiliar with, but I think once you hear us talking about it, it's really going to open up a new perspective of how to move in this weird reality that we find ourselves in. So welcome, Saul.
Thank you for that warm welcome, Lisa Marie. Thank you for having me, thinking of me, and it is such an honor to be your first male guest. That's amazing.
Yeah, the podcast started really kind of focused on the divine feminine, and I know you actually have a fantastic book. I'm halfway through it, Callie the Destroyer on the divine feminine, and yet it's starting to open up and shift. And I came across your work on Substack, and I've kind of started like devouring actually some of your content, and I'm just really excited to bring you here to share your perspective with many of the women in my community.
Well, that's really kind of you, and I really respect what you're doing and your book and your writing. Just in general, it's very high level. You're very bright and gifted, and so for you to say that really means a lot.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot to me as well, too. I wanted to start a little bit by talking about one of your books that I have here, Get Out of Here Alive, which I think is just it's just such a great perspective and map to start to navigate the kind of odd reality that we find ourselves in. And I think some of the terms that you use throughout the book, and also the terms that you use in your Substack, might be new to my audience. Although I think once we go through them, it will start to kind of open things up. And even for me, as I was reading, it's just like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like, this is such a great way of looking at the different forces that we find, maybe pulling us in one direction or another. So I was hoping that we could start just by maybe defining a few of the terms. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, so you talk about the Matrix. And, we've got The Matrix, the movie, which is kind of similar, I think, to the Matrix that you're talking about. But for someone who's not used to using that word to describe maybe the reality we're in, how would you define that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I would love to distinguish what I'm talking about and writing about from some technological matrix that we're plugged into. What I see going on here is that we're in a dream construct. I like to call it the dreamscape, and it is just a gigantic dream, and we are all players in this dream reality, and you can put all of that in quotes if you want to. Certainly, reality needs to go in quotes because there's nothing outside the dream. I see, even if you want to look at this from a goddess or god perspective, I see that the being that engendered the construct did it through a dream, and we see that with Hindu mythology, all and other things, Aboriginal dream time. Clearly, it's very plausible that we are participating in some vast dream, which is kind of weird and unsettling on the one hand because dreams can be weird, but it's also very empowering because one can learn to control one's dreams. Ergo, we can actually learn to have great agency and personal power in the matrix, as crazy as it seems at times. I like to say we can, at the very least, learn to walk between the raindrops so that we're not always getting wet as the world does its crazy thing.
Could you give me a practical example that could kind of like maybe really help to further illustrate what you mean by kind of this dream state? Like just a specific example.
Yeah, there are all kinds of different ways of accessing power and information by seeing this world as a construct and ourselves as dreamers. For example, Thomas Edison, he invented, I believe it was the light bulb. It was some major invention by learning to access the hypnagogic state between waking and dreaming. So he sat back, and this is how I think he invented multiple things by doing this. He would lean back in his chair, get very relaxed, be on his way to sleeping, and he would be holding some kind of ball in one hand poised above a metal trash can that would make a lot of noise when the ball fell into it, and it would wake him up out of that state that he had just slipped into. So he starts to slip into the dream. His hand relaxes, the ball drops, it wakes him up, and then he immediately thinks of what he was dreaming about.
Mhm.
And one time he was dreaming of the light bulb. So
Yeah,
talk
that's
about
fantastic.
an aha moment. So that's just one way to access the vast library of Babylon that is the Akashic record of the dreaming world, if you wanna look at it that way. Other tools include using your ability to lucid dream, for example, to learn how to become aware that you're dreaming in the dream and then go do things in the dream. Some people can actually go and get information, they can visit loved ones, they can do all kinds of interesting things, in the dream, and you can also cultivate chi or prana or kundalini in this process and come out extremely energized from lucid dreaming.
Yeah, thank you for that. And a lot of my community are very familiar with the teachings of Carl Jung, and he worked with dreams a lot too as a way for our unconscious to speak with us and maybe to give us some wisdom that we hadn't considered. And looking at the dreams as more archetypal than, as far as more of like a one-to-one reality. Is that at all to what you're talking about?
I mean, the archetypal approach to understanding or understanding dreams is certainly valid, but I'm actually talking about something that would be almost the opposite of archetypal usage. It is this idea that dreams are real, that they are real because there are only dreams. So if anything is real, then dreams are real. Otherwise, nothing is real. And it doesn't really matter because you're at that point in time, you're way beyond ontology or epistemology. You're almost just in pure semantics. It's just real, not real. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's all a fabrication of some vast imagination on the one hand, and some very personal, individualized imagination on the other hand.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. And where does the dragon fit into all of this? So you talk about the dragon in Get Out of Here Alive. How does the dragon fit into this dream state or the matrix?
Yeah, I know that you've written about the dragon from the concept of the dragon from a very different perspective as a
Yes.
kind of empowering, well, almost like a feminine archetype in a way of connecting with your inner dragon or I'm sure you've talked about it in various ways, but is that fair to say that you've come at it from a similar angle?
Yeah, I think I've come out of it maybe a little bit of different, like as you said, more of like kind of this feminine empowerment where we
Yes.
look at like a lot of like kind of like modern fiction, like Game of Thrones with
Yeah.
Daenerys, and like these women heroes have a dragon at their back. So almost like this kind of like force to be reckoned with that kind of amplifies their power. But I think you use the dragon a bit differently.
I do, although I wanna point out that in Kali the Destroyer, for example, which is about the goddess and her consort, the god, so it's really about Sophia, Gaia on the one hand, and Thelete or whoever whatever the name you wanna give that being. In Gnosticism, it would be Thelete. That he is sort of her dragon in that
Yeah.
story, if you wanna look at there's also a dragon that they face who is the demiurge or the Lord Archon, so it's a sci-fi tale, but it's also rooted in Gnosticism, so there's at least 2 kinds of dragons in that story, and the dragon that I'm talking about in Get Out of Here Alive is the adversarial type of being. You could call it Satan, you could call it Lucifer, you could call it Wetiko in the Native American tradition, some kind of mind parasite. You could describe it as the trickster, a kind of Loki type of archetype. There are many different names for this being in Mesoamerican shamanism. It's called the flyers or the mud shadows. There's all kinds of names for this being that is a mental parasite that, according to shamans and seers and lots of world mythology and archetypes, is a real force or is a real mental being that came into this realm at some point. I believe this is recorded in Genesis in the eating of the apple and the serpent offering the apple to Eve, and then the quote unquote fall. And we could talk about other interpretations of that. I'm not genderizing this or judging, and I'm just saying here's a story, and I believe it's a story about the dragon coming in and saying, I see your species here as a mostly unconscious species. You're living in harmony with the Mother Earth. That's great, but I see you wanting more. You want to eat of the tree of knowledge, and you can't do that as a collective species. You have to grow an individuality. And I'm going to give you this apple, like the computer. It's an operating system. It's actually my mind. I'm not gonna tell you that, but it is my mind that I'm gonna give you to operate with as a so-called conscious being. So we receive the apple, which is just the dragon's mind, and we use it as our own, thinking that it's our own, even though there's all these crazy voices in there. Those are the voices of the mental parasite.
Yeah.
So part of the path of awakening, if you will, to the dream, the path of shamanism, the path of inner alchemy is to recognize this dynamic and then to cultivate ways of getting that voice out of your head so that you can think for yourself for the very first time. And it's alarming, and it's also very empowering in the end.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I like the term the mind parasite because one of the things that I feel like I've been considering a lot and I've been talking about with my community, and I want to get your thoughts. It almost feels like there's like this mass brainwashing, right? With social media. Everyone, I go to the doctor's office, people are staring at their phone. People are like walking in beautiful parks staring at their phone. And they're being fed content consistently, what you should look like, what you should think, what you should be outraged over. Would you say that that is a way that the dragon also sort of gives us the apple or gets into our brain?
Yeah, it's a modern iteration of what's been developing for centuries, obviously, through the dissemination of more communication tools, more technology. There's been greater and greater control. We hit kind of the print news media at one point, and then that became radio and then television, and now it's delivered to this little thing that is sort of, attached to your body, and probably eventually it will be something in people's brains. I mean, just to be completely honest about where this is all going. So, but it's really a return to source, if you will, because it's just the dragon coming full circle, right back into literally physically into your brain, into your
Yeah.
thought, into your receiver. I don't think of the brain as being the thinking part of ourselves. I think of it as a receiver and a transmitter. But that's a little bit neither here nor there for the purposes of this discussion.
Yeah, and I like that perspective. So thank you for explaining that. Okay, now one more word and then we can have more of the conversation is so what is loosh?
Mm. That's definitely one of those controversial things that you'll see all kinds of definitions for. The way I use it is that it is energy that the human being gives off when it's traumatized. So you can be traumatized by world events, personal situations, bad finances. You can also be traumatized by relationships where you're like codependent, and you can sort of be traumatized by pleasure, traumatized by seemingly good things like what's called love. It's not love, but we call it love. That can also generate trauma. Almost anything that gives you an emotional charge that is not something like you're following your bliss, that's not something that's welling up organically from inside of you, is potentially a source of loose creation, and the dragon feeds on this energy. It's what powers the dragon. If we all learn to take away that energy or food source from the dragon, it would either die, change, or leave.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's something see and feel very clearly, and I feel it in my own life, like, when I scroll through certain media, this sense of, like, polarization, and it actually almost even affects the way that I deal with people at the grocery store. It's a little bit more of, like, this us versus them mentality, so, I'm very careful with what I put into my consciousness, but also the women in my community will tell me how stressed out they are, or how anxious that they've been, looking at something or hearing about something. Is that is that sort of what you're talking about?
Yeah, you can think about the kind of, the news cycle, the whipsawing, good news, bad news, good cop, bad cop news cycle, the the curated perfection of Instagram profiles, of various videos, this is a kind of metastasization, is that the right word? Metastasization, I can't really say it
I
right
think
now.
so. Yeah.
Um, so a metastasizing of older tendencies that came of age really, with early TV and magazines and that kind of thing. So we see the perfection that we what we perceive as the perfection of people's lives that we can never hope to aspire to, and that leaves us totally depleted as our energy, our loosh is sucked from us. Similarly, the endless political games, the shame politics, all of it factors into a global strategy for extracting this energy from the human herd. Now, a lot of people think that this means that we're all going to die, soon. Some big apocalyptic thing is going to happen, but that's really not how it works either because the dragon needs us for its energy, so it can't kill everybody, not at one time anyway. So that's not likely to happen. You can kind of understand these doom scrolling tendencies, apocalyptic narratives, all these truthers, people, conspiracy theorists trying to get to the root of all of these very negative things as basically just witting or unwitting servants, as in a way, of the dragon. I mean, it's just the way it is. I'm sorry to put it that way, but you're basically doing its dirty work, whether you know it or not, when you're going down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, and I feel that very, very strongly. And I know, so one of the things that I've been telling in my community, especially when people will come to me or, they'll come to a live workshop or program and tell them how much the news cycle is affecting them. I will say, like, well, stop, stop watching it. Stop looking at it. And then there is the reaction like, well, I can't just put my head in the sand and, now is the time to fight, to act. What are your thoughts on that? And is there a balance between like not creating the loosh and contributing and feeding the dragon versus putting your head in the sand versus like active alignment?
I've got some lyrics that go like this. What if resistance is just another word for having no inner plan? What if you're not a free bird but just working for the man? So this need to resist, to not put the head in the sand, it's exactly what we're taught because it's what works to keep us in the loosh game and controlled. It's what controls us. It is the fool's wisdom of striking out on your own with no clue how you're going to accomplish something that allows you to accomplish the impossible. And it is precisely sticking your head in the sand that permits you to dream outside the box of this dream construct.
Yeah. I like that. I know recently on Substack you had a meme and I was actually trying to look for it before this conversation and I couldn't find it. But it was something like, if you're not completely disturbed or paralyzed about what's going on right now, like, great, you might be able to do something with your life. Is that,
Right, right.
and I
Yeah, this
really
guy is
liked
like,
that.
if you're not outraged by what you're seeing, then congratulations, now you can do something meaningful with your life.
Yeah. And I think that I really liked that. That resonated because I see people becoming completely paralyzed and completely like just so consumed and caught up with what they believe is wrong that they actually aren't doing anything. They're not moving forward. They're not experiencing pleasure. Their nervous systems are completely activated. So it's really stunting them from a very personal level.
Absolutely. I mean, we're stuck in this fight or flight, culturally speaking. And, we need to learn on a personal level before we can even talk about doing anything collectively. We need to learn how to unplug and reactivate the parasympathetic nervous system and learn how to begin to foster deep relaxation and healing and empowerment from within us. And I feel that inner alchemy is a fantastic way of doing this because you're engaging in active dream practices that foster that parasympathetic activation and that allow you to visualize different possibilities from your current construct. So it's a tremendous manifestation tool. It lets you take back your power from the dragon and then do something very productive with it that can provide not only health benefits, but longevity and perhaps beyond that. That's a whole other discussion we could get into, but it's an amazing thing. So when you read about people doing miracles, when you read about alchemists living a long time or perhaps forever, shamans flying, doing all these crazy things, even people like Padre Pio, doing some of his crazy bilocation miracles. These are people who are utilizing the personal power that's made available by extricating yourself from systems that take away that power and building it up consciously within yourself. And you can do that, as I'm sure Padre Pio did. The way he did it was probably through intensive prayer. So it's non-denominational. It really doesn't matter. It what matters is going inside. I say it over and over again. The only way out is in. That's a mantra: in, get out of here alive. And then I have a follow-up to that, which is called out through the indoor, and it explores other aspects of this equation.
Yeah, and I love how your book too gives like practices that people can start right away. And you keep using the word understanding too, which I think is really important, especially in our culture where I feel like we always think everybody else has the answer somewhere else. This 5-step plan or this, instead of looking inward and kind of trusting with what it is that we know to be true.
Yeah, thanks for getting that, because and I didn't make up the term understanding, and it actually came from, well, basically from conspiracy theorists talking about the legal system. But the way I use it is, as you said, to point out that you shouldn't be understanding someone else's interpretation of things. You should be understanding your own gnosis.
Yeah. And I definitely think in our world, and lately I've been talking a lot about kind of the shadow side of like self help, coaching, and therapy culture where somebody always knows the answer. I think that that's a really nice antidote to that, as well as looking inward. One of the things that you said too that I think is really important, and it's one of the threads that I'm weaving in 2026 is when we talked about putting your head in the sand and then dreaming different possibilities. I feel to some extent that we're almost in this like imagination drought where people have stopped imagining. One, I think because they're just tied to their phones all day and they're letting other people imagine and create for
Mm,
themselves. But, when I was a kid, we didn't have phones. So we had nothing to do but walk around and imagine things. And like, it's so powerful, and yet I feel like it's such an underused resource, or that people don't even know how to imagine. I actually see my kids are on their devices too often. I'm like, don't you want to like think and like pretend and imagine? What are your thoughts on kind of the power of imagination and whether people can even access it anymore? At least some people.
right. I mean, you make a lot of really good points. You know that there are countries in the world that are making it illegal for kids under 16 to get on social media. And I think they have different reasons for doing that, having to do with safety. But I think ultimately that's a good thing. I feel that this screen slaving that's going on, to cite The Incredibles, is one of the most pernicious things in the way that we're raising our children right now. And that if you look at it through this lens, it's one of the most debilitating things you could possibly do. I'm not saying that we can't use technology and easy access to information and creativity tools to do amazing things. What I am saying is that until you have learned how to access your own power, your own imagination, your own voice, your own dreaming, you're always going to be creating someone else's version of reality. What you're
Mhm.
fed, literally, it's a feed. It's called a feed because we live on a loosh farm and you're being told what to think, how to be, etc. It's just really debilitating. When you have the opportunity to grow up, to individuate, to become ensouled, because we could talk about, what I have to say about the soul, then you can use these tools much more consciously in an empowered fashion where then you can also just put them down. I don't even own a cell phone. I'm not saying I will never own a cell phone.
That is
It's
amazing, and I'm
it's
very
gotten a lot
impressed.
harder, and I'm not saying I don't use cell phones occasionally, but I don't own one that I carry around.
Mhm.
So that is, it's very, very empowering when I share that with people. A lot of people are amazed. A lot of people are like, "I wish I could do that." But, increasingly, I meet people who say, they're in the same position. They haven't had one in years, or they've never had one, and people kind of coming out of the woodwork, and I always say, "Luddites unite." The people who were tearing up the factories when I'm not anti-technology. I'm really not, because I think we have to live in our era. We have to be, in it, but you can be in it, but not be of it. And that's the distinction I would like to leave people with.
Yeah, and I think it's, very important too, and I'm very impressed, I know when I go somewhere and I leave my cell phone, there's, like, first, like, an initial, like, "Oh my god, what would I how am I going to live without my cell phone?"
Right.
And then there's, like, the sense of calm, like, "Oh, I don't have to be available, I can just, like, enjoy the scenery." So yeah, it's definitely something I think to play with, and I experiment with trying to leave it places. That's about as far as I got so far, but I am aware of it.
Yeah, it's amazing, I mean, I grew up, I came of age in the '80s, right? So, obviously, we didn't have cell phones at the time, and, it was possible to kind of slip off the grid of society and do things to really get off the map and have private adventures, as it were, whether you're traveling or just walking in nature, doing whatever you're doing, you can literally not have that attachment line to other people's expectations. It's really amazing. Now we can recreate that to some extent now, but it's a lot more difficult, and it takes a certain kind of lifestyle. Obviously, people have jobs and responsibilities that they've taken on, that they've chosen. So people have to determine how important it is for them to live in a certain way. But I will say, I don't think anyone it would be incapable of taking a few hours off here and there, or a day a week, or something, like arranging it just to kind of clear your energy field, because you're just really cluttered. Someone looked at your aura from an energetic perspective, and you've got all these thoughts, and you've been receiving all these feeds. I mean, you're going to be a bit of a mess.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think a digital detox, is so important, especially in the morning and the evening. I always tell everyone to not like be scrolling up until the point you go to bed, or don't be grabbing your phone as soon as you wake up. Like you need those times specifically. You need more, but I mean, definitely upon waking and sleeping, do not start scrolling through the media.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, I know your book gives some like great practices. Now, as I mentioned, I think for much of my community, some of these terms are going to be fairly new. But what would you say, like, for someone who's starting to be like, okay, I don't want to create all this loosh. I don't want to feed the dragon, and I want to start creating my own reality. What would be like just one simple step to start with?
Yeah, great question. Well, let me explain to folks who haven't read it how the book is divided in a kind of rough way. It's sort of in two parts. And before I explain what those two parts are, let me say that in shamanism, which is basically a technology of consciousness. It's a way of manipulating your own consciousness and building it out in different ways. There are a couple of different strategies for taking back your energy, taking back your power. One is a strategy of not doing things. It's actually called not doing. You see this term in Castaneda's work, for example. And then there are more active strategies having to do with learning how to go into lucid dreams and that kind of thing, which allow for cultivation of power through doing something. And it's usually something you've never done before, or you didn't know how to do properly or very well. So the book is sort of divided in that way. So the first half is about the not doings. I don't recommend to anyone necessarily that they just jump off the deep end into inner alchemy or shamanism without having done a lot of not doing. And the not doing involves things like learning the power of your own silence, learning when, as Will Rogers said, never miss a good chance to shut up. And you can use this very powerfully with your own thoughts, with that voice in your head, and just not responding to it, not engaging it. You can extend this into social media and interactions. If someone's trolling you or whatever, just block them. You don't have to say anything, just block them. Just pretend they don't exist. Or in a relationship or in a conflict, you can use silence to basically walk away, literally or figuratively, from the conflict. I mean, the great French president Charles de Gaulle, he said, silence is the most powerful political weapon there is. So you can use it very, very powerfully. So there is a wonderful form of not doing that will get you out of a lot of scrapes and situations where otherwise your energy would be taken from you. And I know you felt it. If you're listening to this conversation, you've had conflicts and things where you just feel like, you just need to go and take a hot bath and go to bed, whereas you're just beat. And what's happened is you've just been looshed by that exchange. And that energy doesn't really go to the person who's doing that. It kind of floats up around both of you, and then it just goes right into the dragon's mouth.
Yeah, I think that is such great way to start is just thinking about just the silence because I think everybody feels that they need to engage or they might have to have their last word where kind of just tuning inward and not engaging. Oh, that reminds me of something else that you say in here and I might be paraphrasing, but in that in the movie War Games, right? Like the only way to win is to stop playing. And I
Right.
think that's what you're getting at here as well too. Is that
Yeah, I
correct?
love I love that quote. I've used it many times, and there's a bunch of different memes associated with it. Yeah, it's very much part of what I'm writing about here. The Get Out of Here Alive, this book grew out of a previous book that's on my Substack. It's called The World, Cult, and You. And in that book, I called the dragon the great parasite, and I called the construct the game board. So this
Mm.
massive game board, and what you're learning to do is find ways to essentially not play by the rules of the game board and to create your own rules within the construct with an eye towards perhaps getting out of the construct at some point. And that's really the ultimate subject of Get Out of Here Alive is how to exit the construct and move on to other worlds that you might play a major role in creating, dreaming. There's a great little meme because you've been talking about my memes, and I've been on a
You have
meme.
great memes.
Well, it's like, I mean, they're fun, and one of these, and I don't make all these memes. I make some of them, but it's basically it was this wizard. I can't remember the exact language, but it's this wizard with like a little something in his hands, and he says, "Don't talk to me unless you can create a fully functional miniaturized universe." And what he's getting at is this idea that if you are learning how to become a creator, like the divine creator that created this world, you can start small with your mental energy. For example, in there's a lot of esoteric and paranormal literature on things called tulpas and egregores, which are basically thought forms that are materialized into existence by adepts, for example, in Tibet, who learn how to create a servitor, a little helper. And they're so real that these things can do things. They can go bring you stuff. Other people can often see them. They're actually being dreamed into existence in the construct by the power just of the imagination. So that is the first step towards actually being able to create a kind of little miniaturized universe. And if you can do that, then you can learn to create a whole universe and you can become a creator god or goddess.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And it's just so empowering. And I think that again goes back to imagination instead of always focusing. And for me, I've been kind of talking about it too, is like shifting from what's wrong consciousness to, oh my God, everything is wrong and I'm wrong and the world is wrong to like, what's possible? What is it that I want to create? How do I want to live? And how can I just start doing that now?
Hmm. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. For me, those are the questions, like what do I really want? What is my desire? I mean, we even live in a world where, we're shown all of these images to make us desire things and people on the one hand, and then we're taught that desire is bad at the exact same time. One hand giveth, the other hand taketh away. It's part of the whole louch extraction. It's meant to confuse us. And, basically, and this is where the shadow work comes in, because unless you're willing to embrace the parts of you that have been denigrated, that have been basically swept under the carpet, under the rug, or put in a dark closet somewhere, you really can never integrate fully enough to access all of your power because you are all of those things. You're all of the things that you hate.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really hard for a lot of people to understand. It could be like we could look at things like, "I'm nothing like that." And it's like, but there's such that strong kind of resonance. It's like, "But are you sure?" Or
Mhm,
should you
mhm.
be a little more like that?
Yeah, it's like, there's a great Carl Jung, you talked about him earlier, a
Yeah.
meme, it's him with this really funny look on his face, all kind of a knowing look, almost a grin or a mischievous grin, and he's saying, "Nice shadow you've got there. Would be the same if someone integrated it."
Yeah, I like that. I also just wanted to jump to your other book, Callie the Destroyer, and that's Callie with a C because in my community we work with the Callie with the K a bit, although of course it's part of Callie with the K. So I haven't finished this yet, but I'm pretty close, and it's just such a fantastic book and a beautiful way to, I think, explain some like more esoteric concepts. But can you just give us a little bit of a summary of it in your own words, because I think my audience will be very interested in learning more.
Yeah, sure. I think you could put this novel in the dystopian category, generally speaking. I think it's way beyond that, and it's kind of dystopian with a twist. But if you wanted to kind of situate it in the realm of things like Hunger Games and Handmaid's Tale and that kind of thing, then that works for me. That's pretty accurate. What makes this different is that it's also a story. It's a retelling of the fallen goddess scenario that John Lamb Lash writes about in Not in His Image, which is a book that I highly recommend. It's basically the idea that what is called the goddess is actually a goddess, and it's a being that came from galactic center or whatever that is, if you're not into the idea of space. And this being came to this area, actually accidentally fell out of the center of the galaxy, spun through space, created a group of rogue, hive minded extraterrestrials called the Archons, which would be like our older brothers and sisters, and then became the planet that then gave birth to the human species. And here we are today living on the body of the goddess. And so that's the fallen goddess scenario in a nutshell. And within the Gnostic text, there's this idea that the destroyer, so Kali the destroyer, is supposed to come forward at some point and essentially melt down the simulation of the archons, meaning the mental virus that creates this illusory experience of a controlled reality. And so this destroyer is designed to do that. And so I took this idea of the fallen goddess, and I created a character named Callie, spelled with a C, who is in a futuristic dystopian world. She where the South has risen again, and and there's a massive segregation. She is like a rock star. She's a pop star, and then all these things start happening to her. She has this wild mother. She meets this young boy named Juice who lives in another village. So he is of another race that's not cool in her world. So they have a kind of illicit love affair that goes on. And this pair is basically twin flames, if you want to use that language. And they end up realizing they're kind of on the same mission, and their mission involves embodying aspects of these divine beings. It's very, very intense. They end up traveling to a realm where they meet the high priestess of the goddess, and that plot unfolds, and there are Illuminati and wild sci-fi things going on. It's quite a tale, and I won't tell you the ending of it, but what it trends toward is this idea that there is a luminous child, and this comes from one of the Gnostic texts, and I use it as my epigraph. The Sophia, the Aeon Sophia, she tells the Lord Archon that you're blind, and there's actually this immortal child of light, this luminous child that's going to show up right when you think you've taken over the world and controlled everything, and this child is going to undo everything you've done, and it's going to reveal it to the whole world, and your power will be destroyed.
Yeah,
And
it's
so the
fantastic.
book is about that theme.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's fantastic. It's been like such a pleasure to read. We read a lot of books in my community, so I'm hoping to, make this one of them later in the year because I just think it will it's just a beautiful perspective, and I think it's fiction, but it's also a teaching novel as well too, and I think it inspires imagination, which is, again, what I think is just so critical at this point in time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you could say it's a little bit didactic in that way. I tried to make it interesting and sexy and adventurous and all of that, but there is certainly an intention to use this story to share some larger concepts, some metaphysical and physical principles having to do with the nature of the construct. I talk about loosh. Obviously, there you have your baseline of Gnosticism and your archons and the Lord Archon and the people serving the archons, the minions doing the bidding of this hive consciousness and how that works. And yeah, it's pretty wild stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting, like, when you talk about it, if you're not kind of familiar, it can sound like very, yeah, like very sci-fi or very, dramatic, but then if you look at it, it's kind of like, "Oh, I can see how we're living that too right now." And, sometimes the things that we think are very surreal, we're like, "Oh, it's not really that surreal. It actually feels like it might be happening."
Yeah, it's funny. I brought that novel through. I kind of downloaded it right on the eve of COVID, and so I was well into the book when a lot of the COVID agenda started rolling out. So people will see it's almost as if it seems to be copying reality. But the funny thing is that I got the whole plot in a dream sequence or in a one night's period before any of that started happening.
Wow, that is really interesting because as I was reading it, and actually I've been listening to it. I have it on Audible. I actually do need to get the book because sometimes I listen, but I seem to understand things better when I read as opposed to listen. But I almost thought that you must have written it after COVID because it was so foreshadowing that, oh, this must be your take on it. But that's really interesting that you got that download before.
Yeah, and people who knew that, they were contacting me going, can't even believe this. This is wild. How did you know this was gonna be happening?" And I'm like, I don't know. I got this download and I wrote it. I wrote it as it was
That's
given.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been tracking a lot of the things that went down in COVID having to do with, the injections and all that sort of thing, and so I was aware of some of the potential agendas and all of that. And yet, I'm at a point now where I still don't think it's important to really do all of that, that it's still if that's your life, not just I'm not talking about being aware of things. I'm talking about being emotionally connected to things that you're
Yeah.
loosed by. You can be aware of all that you want to be as long as you have time left over to do the inner work. That's my opinion. But if it becomes like a lifestyle and you're fighting the good fight and all you can do is look out at the world and see all these people who have all this nanotech running around inside them or whatever from whatever which may or may not be true, then, I mean, what a sad way to live. What a waste of your life and your consciousness. I'm just sorry. I mean, to speak so bluntly, but there's so much more interesting things you could be doing. I mean, almost anything is more interesting than that.
Oh, completely agree. Yes, and there's any so much more interesting things that you could be doing. Yeah, and if that's and that's really one of the things that attracted me to your content is just being able to kind of remind people of that there are choices they can make and the realities that they create. And I think that that's just that can't be stressed enough in our culture where it seems like people want to go down these rabbit holes or people want to be, pointing fingers at us versus them as opposed to just living a creative life.
Yeah, you made me think with the rabbit hole thing. There's an effect that you've probably heard of, the Mandela effect, that I've written some on recently, based
Yes.
on this new book called The Mandela Dilemma by this Australian writer named Johnny Flynn. And it's really, really brilliant. And the reason I bring this up is because here is a way of kind of becoming aware of some of that conspiracy theory stuff, this idea that memories have been perhaps changed. Or that physical phenomena like the logo is it Looney Tunes with two O's, or is it Looney Tunes like tunes Tunes, that kind of thing? Is it, does the Monopoly man have a monocle or not? So all of these things that have basically, according to one camp, they've created these essentially false memories where people are just somehow misremembering en masse, which is an absurd notion if you ask me. This fuzzy trace theory and all this stuff. Or there's something far weirder going on where we're actually seeing reality being edited.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, I noticed that you've
So
been posting on that. So, yeah, I'm gonna go dig a little bit deeper
So,
into.
so Johnny calls it his model the hollow conscious universe model, and it's very similar to the model that I've been developing for years over many books. Potentiate Your DNA is one of those books, and it's this idea that consciousness is the thing that is not physical that predates what we perceive as the physical. So there is no going back to the big bang, the beginning of the physical, without entering the realm of pure consciousness. So what underlies the game board, the construct, the dreamscape, is just pure consciousness. There is nothing there except consciousness. And it is both an active force and a realm of storage, and you could compare it to something like a computer system where you have your memory, your data, you have all the previous versions, and things can be edited at that storage layer that then manifest in the holograph or in the construct afterwards. And the Mandela effect is this really playful thing that you can begin studying that shows this happening. And Johnny's book is brilliant because he basically debunks all of the debunkers. And he shows that this can only be interpreted as a metaphysical paranormal phenomenon based in consciousness.
Yeah. That's so interesting, and it's so wild to think about, like, reality being edited.
Right. So the ultimate punchline is that we are people who can edit it. We can become powerful and knowledgeable enough to access the storage files, the base layer, and edit aspects of at least our own reality.
Yeah.
This is like manifestation on steroids.
Oh, I love it. I mean, and it's just so empowering, and, so much of the antidote to the world is happening to me in this kind of victim consciousness state is like, what is the reality I'm going to create?
Right. Right. That's well said. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all of your wisdom. If there's anything you would like to leave the audience with, do you have any guidance or wisdom? And also, how can people find you, connect with you? I'll have everything in the show notes.
Thanks for that and for asking me if there's anything I'd like to share. I would say I can be contacted at, or you can follow my work at saulluckman.substack.com. That's my main hub. Yes, my books are on Amazon, all that kind of thing, but where I post the most content, the most varied and original content and exclusive stuff is over on my Substack. So please come by, check it out. You can do a free subscription, you can do a trial subscription, blah blah blah. So that's cool. I've been contemplating this idea, that we're in the year of the horse right now and what that might mean. And, we came out of the year of the snake. So I'm very curious where the energy will go. I have a painting. I also paint a painting I did years ago that I've shared in relation to this idea. And the painting is called Unbroken. And it's this Mustang, just the head of a Mustang. It's really like intense and looks like this unbroken horse. Like, you can't mess with it. So I'd like for all of us to pursue our own understanding in 2026 of what it means to become for the first time again, however you do it, to become actually unbroken in ways where you feel broken. And you can take that to mean whatever you mean. It can mean healing and it can also mean freedom. So, or other things. So I wish that for everyone that can come into your life because that would be that would make 2026 an extremely empowering year.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for that. And yeah, your Substack is fantastic. I'm a big fan, and that will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time today.
Well, Lisa Marie, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. You asked great questions. Maybe we can chat again sometime. I'd love to get into your work. So, I do some interviews over on my Substack. So maybe we can do that at some point.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I would love that.